How on God's earth did you even know about this? How many people know about this? I didn't know anything until I read your script and then saw the video. How do you know so much about this?
Well, I'm of Italian descent myself. My father's an immigrant, and my mother's parents are immigrants from Italy. So I grew up in an Italian household, and Columbus Day celebrations have always been, a fun time when we get to, you know, come out and celebrate being Italian, living in America. And then in the recent years, with the woke pushing back on everything, on, attacking Columbus Day, and, it seemed like it was an attack on us. So I just started to look into it, what is the true history of Columbus Day? And it turns out that the true history of Columbus Day is, it's ironic that the left is attacking it because Columbus Day was established to make Americans more accepting of immigrants, specifically Italian immigrants. So it's ironic that the left has taken this route.
Well, under ironic is a picture of the left. I mean, the left claims to be feminist, and yet they are the greatest destroyers of women's sports in American history. So irony is their trademark. So this history is fascinating. So let's begin with why it was established, which I did not know, by the way, the level of anti-Italian bigotry. Maybe start with that. This is a sad chapter in American life, but we need to know sad chapters too. So briefly tell us about that.
Yeah, so back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a mass migration of Italian immigrants, and the sentiment was very low. We even had the New York Times writing articles about Italian immigrants, calling them low, ignorant class of people coming to our shores. They would refer to Italians as Dagos, which is an ethnic slur to talk about Italians. And they would even write approvingly of a lynching of Italian citizens or Italian Americans. So with the sentiment being at an all-time low, you had also a mass lynching, one of the worst acts of racial violence in American history. You had a mass lynching of 11 Italian Americans in New Orleans over hearsay. There wasn't even anyone guilty in a trial, but there was a mob violence that broke out, and there was a mass lynching of Italians. So Italians, when they first got here, they didn't have it easy.
By the way, I just want to make clear, lynching is not the literal hanging. They were murdered, but it wasn't. They weren't hanged from trees. I just want to make that clear.
Oh, okay. Yes, I think they were. That incident in 1891. I think they were murdered first and then hanged later, displayed later. There was just a crazy mob violence that broke out.
The whole point of Columbus Day was to have Americans start honoring Italians instead of demeaning them. By the way, the comments of Alana, citations from the New York Times, I'm starting to think that sort of like the left, the New York Times is almost always wrong. Is that interesting? I mean, it's not new. They've never been as leftist, but they sort of go along with the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. If the spirit of the times was to crap on Italians, that's what the New York Times did. It's the spirit of the times was to deny Stalin's evil. It's what the New York Times did. The only time I know the New York Times was right was in the 1970s. It had an editorial, the correct minimum wage, $0.00. That's the only time I remember. This is the beginning of Alana's video. It is up at PragerU. It is this week. Why Immigrants Should Love Columbus Day.
As Columbus Day dies a slow, woke death, it might be a good idea to consider how this national holiday came about in the first place. The answer might surprise you. Ready for it? The purpose of Columbus Day was to encourage Americans to be more accepting of immigrants, specifically Italian immigrants. The Italian explorer, once universally regarded as a great hero, was the symbol of the holiday, not the focus of it. Here's the historical context. Following a mass migration from southern Italy beginning in the 1880s, the status of Italian Americans was at an all-time low. How low was clearly illustrated by one of the single worst episodes of racial violence in American history: the mass murder and lynching of 11 Italian Americans in New Orleans in 1891. Hatred against the Italian newcomers had been brewing for years and was openly encouraged by leading newspapers of the day. For example, in 1882, the New York Times ran an editorial under the headline, "Our Future Citizens," in which the Times stated, "There has never been, since New York was founded, so low and ignorant a class among the immigrants as the Southern Italians." In 1887, the same New York Times wrote approvingly of the lynching in Mississippi of a man they referred to as Dago Joe, Dago being an ethnic slur for Italians. Anti-immigrant sentiment was especially intense in New Orleans, where Italians were settling in large numbers. Local papers accused them of working for below-market wages, engaging in all manner of crimes, and being more loyal to the Pope than the president. These seething resentments broke to the surface when the city's police chief, David Hennessy, was assassinated in the fall of 1890. As the chief lay dying in the street, a witness claimed to have heard him say that Dagos had shot him. In a response, authorities rounded up hundreds of Italians, eventually charging 9 of them with complicity in Hennessy's murder. When their trial resulted in 6 not guilty verdicts and 3 mistrials, the public was outraged. Further inflamed by the local press, some decided to take justice into their own hands. According to journalist Aaron Blakemore, here's what happened. Thousands of angry residents
we'll leave it there and let people get a taste of how fascinating the video is. And so they established Columbus Day as an antidote to anti-Italian prejudice. You know, it's particularly bizarre to us today, Alana, that there was this contempt for Italians. It's so bizarre. Even then, I mean, in the New York Times, they could write about Italians that way, but weren't they attending Puccini and Verdi operas? Who were Puccini and Verdi? You know, where were they from? Ireland? It's so bizarre. You know, I just look up here, prominent Italian Americans, and, you know, my favorite musician of all time, Frank Sinatra, is an obvious one. But just on the intellectual level, Enrico Fermi, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work on radioactivity and the discovery of new elements. And he was from the University of Rome, and he came to America. I mean, the list is quite remarkable. It is hard to relate to the bigotry against Italians that would have existed at that time, and then the massacre of these Italians for a crime they didn't even commit. And so tell my listeners how Columbus Day was seen as an antidote.
Well, you know, it opened the door for Italian Americans who had been treated so badly during all these years. It opened the door for them to finally be included in the American origin story. And that was really important, you know, an Italian explorer having, you know, discovered the New World. So from there, Italians were able to make a lot of contributions to society, and sentiments changed, obviously, and we can't even picture it now. You know, like when you think about, or when you look back to see what happened in 1891, it seems so like impossible. Like, how could that, you know, lynching or murdering Italians just because they're Italians? So things have changed, and Columbus Day was one of those, you know, in large part to
What year was it founded?
I think Benjamin Harrison issued a proclamation to celebrate Columbus Day on the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering the New World, and I think that was
1892. Yeah. But he
became
I like Benjamin Harrison. Yeah. He was a special guy. Listen, you're terrific. I am glad to meet you. Hope everybody watches your PragerU video, and I'm sure we'll meet again.
Thanks. You as well. Thank you for having me.